I'd like to start tonight with just a small quote. And that quote is very simple. It says, "Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself." And that comes from a long, distant book deep within the archives of history known as Harry Potter. Yeah, obviously very recent. But seriously, guys, that's the thing that I talk about with these stories, the fear, the creepiness, the scary value that comes behind each story, environment, and setting, and character, the name we give them. The name we give those places or those stories or those videos we watch. Power builds up behind those names, and that power is fear. The power of fear, and to be creeped out, and to be scared, and to have your heart go doki doki in the middle of the night. That's what makes these stories so great. And that's what makes it so fun to actually research them and then expose you to them in return. And that said, I want you to travel deep and dark with me into Osoroshii Saturday.
All my fucking life is just a fucking game. I'm going through the barriers and you're doing the same. Running down the floor and going up again. Losing ticking arrows and thinking it's too late.
To reach the fucking top and don't stand the face. To get up on the feet, look around, think about this grace of a classical dream and go down on the cross.
Our first story is a very simple story. It's just called the ryokan. It deals with my friend who went to Okinawa and stayed at a ryokan. If you don't know what one of those is, it's pretty much a traditional Japanese style hotel. Most simple explanation I can give you. Tatami mats, shoji doors, and usually an onsen. If you don't know what an onsen is, it's pretty much a hot spring with mineral water coming out of the earth. Usually great for renewing your skin, your complexion, and possibly even your spirit and soul if you're one of those type of people. He went there just for some relaxing time before the school year started. He wanted to chill out, refresh himself, and get ready to be Genki for that next school year. So he headed out there and he said his first day there was great. He had plenty of time because he had arrived in the morning time to bathe in their onsens, get totally refreshed, afterwards get a massage, and that night dine on one of their great 5-course or 8-course meals. They're always a 5 or 8-course meal at these luxurious hotels, and the food is wonderful. Let me tell you, if you love Japanese cuisine, you need to eat at a ryokan. So like I said, he had a wonderful meal, went to bed that night, and had a really weird dream. He said his first night he was there, he had a dream where he had shadows of people looking over him, like as if he was laying down and he could see the silhouettes of their bodies looking over him. Simple dream, he woke up, didn't really think too much about it. The next day, did the same type of stuff, and then that night went to bed again. This time the dream was different. He had the same bodies looking over him, the silhouettes, but he couldn't make out the faces again. This time in the background, though, he could hear people moaning. He could also hear the sounds of gunshots. He could hear the sounds of people wincing in pain and possible screaming from those in agony. Then he heard the people who were silhouettes above him starting to discuss stuff with each other. He didn't think much about it. It was really creepy. He woke up a little bit early that day because it didn't let him sleep too well. Last night at the hotel, he did all the same stuff again, but he felt a little bit of agitation during the day. He said he also started to feel a heaviness about him. And by the end of the day, he said he felt like a hard headache in his head, a intense, not sinus or head headache, but just an overall spiritual body ache, he said. And it's not something he's really that into. He's not a spiritual guy. He's not any kind of granola. So for him, it was a very odd experience. He went to bed that night and had the most critical dream of the entire stay there. He could hear the people talking to each other that were the silhouettes over him again, along with all the pain and the agony and the screaming, and you could hear people repeating a Japanese word over and over again, kurushi, 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 which means I'm suffering, I'm suffering. And he kept hearing that again and again. The gunshot sounds were also heard again, and he said he could also hear planes or vehicles constantly zooming around him, and the possibility of bombs being dropped maybe. He couldn't quite make out the sound because everything felt so muffled, as though his own senses were distorted. He said the dream finally came to an abrupt and very frightening stop when the people talking above him finally turned to another one who stepped forward, took over the whole thing, pulled out a big sawbone blade and started to cut into him. And that's where he said he felt an extreme amount of pain and just came to a sudden waking up point. It was a huge rush for him, and he said it was completely exhilarating in the way of fear. The next day he felt it was important that he at least learn a little bit about the history of where he had stayed. So he went to the manager, who was the head of the staff there at the hotel, and asked him a little bit about what is the history of this place, and this is what he told him. The manager told him that this place had been a ryokan before World War II. It had the same history, and even though it had been refurbished, it did have kind of a tainted history in the fact that during World War II, a lot of things in Japan were converted. For example, this ryokan was converted into a makeshift hospital. There had been doctors there who had worked on patients who dealt with extreme cases of critical wounds during wartime tragedy. And unfortunately, the room he had stayed in had actually been an operating room in the past. My friend's only inclination is that possibly he was reliving what some old patient had gone through. I myself don't know what to believe exactly when I hear these kind of stories. My own personal experience in Okinawa was one time I visited some caves there, and those caves were actually man-made caves that had been dug out for deep, deep trenches when America was about to storm the Okinawa beaches. And if you go down there, you can read all different types of plaques about how different sections were made into makeshift hospitals, and different areas were made for storing food, and the conditions were just horrible. I mean, humans cannot live underground in caves. We were not meant to, and neither were the supplies that we need in order to survive. And unfortunately, this led to a lot of infection, gangrene, the spreading of illnesses and things like that. And people suffered down there. And when I was down there, I experienced one of these headaches the guy was talking about. It was an extremely hard headache, just solid through your whole body, starting at the top of your head. That's why I've called it a headache, and just working its way all the way through your body, that kurushi suffering type feeling. And my wife said she felt it too, and we had to come back to our hotel room and just take a rest after we saw that part of Okinawa. It was kind of an unsettling aspect of our trip. So that's our story. This next one isn't really so much a story as it is a ritual. A ritual that is very, very rarely practiced ever in Japan, and considered quite a dark and kind of disturbing one that I don't even recommend you practice yourself, and I myself would never partake in. It's called the hide and seek game, and it's played with a doll just like this. Now, I've heard this tale told a couple times on different creepypasta sites throughout the internet, and they kind of have it right for the most part. There are a few steps, though, that are a little bit messed up. I myself am getting my source straight from Japan, a professor who deals in Japanese mythos and things like that, and this is my own explanation of the ritual. Yours may vary. Who is the exact source on this, we may never know. I'm just going to tell you what I personally know. You have a doll, and this doll is who you're going to play hide and seek with. Now, in Japan, dolls hold souls. They have spirits. They're not just considered to be a toy or something you play with or something that can just be thrown away. For example, when someone gets rid of a doll in Japan, you cannot just put it in the trash or throw it in a waste bin and hope that they'll come and pick it up. There's actual festivals, matsuris, and rituals in which there's called doll burnings. You gather up your town's dolls and you put them in a big bonfire and burn them out, because that's the only way to properly dispose of the souls inside and give them a proper resting. It's the same as humans here in Japan. Everybody here is cremated. We expect we should do the same for dolls. This doll right here is a traditional geisha doll. And as you can see, she's actually holding the stick here. I think in the past, due to the fact that this one is so old, it used to have 2 tassels hanging down from it that would hold fake buckets of water. And unfortunately, those are gone now, but that's due to the fact of the age of this doll. The ritual I'm talking about, the hide and seek ritual, actually deals with you cutting off the head right here and filling up the whole body with rice. Now that rice is supposed to give it a more corporal presence and bring it over from the ethereal side. That in turn brings life to the doll and can make it more animated when you play this game of hide and seek. Your next step is you need a weapon of some sort. I would suggest maybe a knife because that's the easiest thing to attain here in Japan legally. After that, what you're going to go ahead and do is take that doll. After it's been filled up with rice, you need to sew it back, keep the head back on, and then you need to use red string. Red yarn, anything red that's a string. It's used as a representation of blood or chi, which is power, and also chi means blood as well. That's going to be sewn onto the doll as well and bind the doll actually. In the same way that you would do any type of binding ritual you can read more about. Some of the same stuff you may have read about in Fatal Frame, that type of bonding ritual. And you'll take the doll, bind it, and you're going to get ready to play hide and seek. Drop that doll into a filled tub of water or bucket of water, any which way in which it can be submerged. Make sure it's obviously filled with rice first or it's not going to be able to drop to the bottom. After that, you're going to hide for a bit and then say, "Come ready to find me." You're going to be saying this in Japanese, of course. And go back to the doll, stab it with the knife, and then it's your turn to go hide. You've hidden in somewhere in your house, and you're going to go ahead and at that point be hunted by the doll. Now, what you need to do in order to stay safe from the spirits of the doll is keep salt in every corner of your house. Keep the salt in a little dish, and this is something that wards away omens and spirits, and that'll keep you safe. Once you want the ritual to end, you need to sprinkle salt over the doll, and you should probably purify your apartment. I myself have never played this game, and I don't advise you to play it either. Nonetheless, I thought I still would expose you to the ritual. The reason I advise never playing this is because I have read about it on sites like Nichan and Underground Sayori, and those type of sites talk about the fact that people have felt the presence of being hunted afterwards. And not just while they're playing the game, but for long afterwards. They said they've heard stuff like footsteps in the night, someone following them around their house, and that the doll that they used, they never got rid of it because you can't just throw away a doll like I said. They had to wait for that matsuri in their town to burn the doll, and they said while they had that doll for the rest of the year, that it would show up in different places all around their apartment for the rest of that year, possibly stalking them as they thought. My advice, don't play it. This next section I just call Camera Ghosts. It deals with 4 or 5 stories in which the people in these stories talk about ghosts that they actually caught on either video camera or a snapshot camera. These deal with the stories behind those different shots or videos, and they also deal with the experiences of the people who were haunted by some of the ghosts related to these pictures. Let's take a look. I'll narrate as you watch. In our first video here, we have a girl who is practicing tennis, and during this home video recording, the person actually captured a ghost showing up behind the legs of this girl who is practicing. It's going to be shown really quick. It was right there. You probably didn't see it because it's super quick. It's like dirty ghost feet is the best way I can describe it. What they're going to do here is show it one more time. Moichido it says, as you can see. And if you look directly behind her, underneath her legs right here, you're going to see the ghost legs show up. It's going to be really quick, so look closely. Here we go. It's going to show up in just a second here, right behind her legs. There they are. Did you see them? One more time. There they are. Go back and rewind it again if you didn't get a chance. Here is a J-pop group that you might not have heard of. They're practicing here in a studio that they were renting that they themselves report as haunted. According to the video that they recorded right there that you just saw, Viewers who watched it reported that they saw scary images in the background. Now, we'll reveal what those are at the end here, but first we'll go over the fact that while they were staying in that house, they dealt with a lot of supernatural presence. The door slammed shut one time when they were practicing, when they were the only people in the building. After that, they went to go check downstairs to see if anybody else was in there. They said they felt the presence of someone in the toilet, and when they opened the door to that area, no one was actually inside. So there was something about this house was haunted, and later they found out that this converted studio house had actually been a suicide apartment. Unfortunately, this has to be noted by the real estate agent when they purchased this place, and they were not informed. They dealt with also during this video, as I said, a presence in the background. If we watch closely in this video, you'll see up by the ceiling as the film actually moves up to the top here. Looking out of the ceiling is a ghostly presence. Take a look, and if you can see, there's a face coming down from the ceiling, peering at the viewer. This story covers a girl who was in college and dealt with the presence of a suicide ghost in the apartment that she was renting. She said she could constantly feel his presence in the house as she was working, studying, and doing nonchalant things. The presence was constantly behind her back, or either something that she could see or feel, especially in mirror images. A lot of ghosts tend to show up in mirror images in Japan. She said she could feel or either sometimes see this ghost. The worst occasion ever was one time when she was going to sleep. The whole thing kind of built to a crescendo one time when, while she was sleeping, she was awakened by someone climbing the ladder of her bunk beds. Knowing her roommate was not at home at the time, she knew it could not be her since she was away on vacation. Laying there in bed, she decided that she would not move, she would not pay attention to the presence, and she would try her best to ignore it. Unfortunately for her, this did not work due to the fact that it continued. The noise in the house continued, and the presence continued to creep her out. Slowly climbing up the ladder to her bunk bed, she said she could feel it creeping closer and closer, until finally this time, she actually got a really good look at the face of the ghost and the suicide person who was behind it, and she said it was that of a young man or a young boy who he himself had been in college at her same college. And if you look quickly, it'll only show it very fast. This is not actual video, it's a reenactment. So she's saying this is what she saw when she saw that presence. Very dark and not a lot of definition to the face, but definitely a presence that she could sense when she was in this apartment during this time. You can just see the make out of a nose and maybe a lower mouth. This is her then getting interviewed about a picture she took after that with her friends, and when she took this video was when she actually experienced the camera side of the ghost, and it had actually deleted her from the photo. And the weird thing about this one is this photo was actually taken on an iPhone. This is a story about a man who constantly had the same dream over and over again, in which he himself experienced driving with his family on the road in the dream. And while driving, a car roars in front of him very fast, and always he's had the same dream again and again and again and again. And what happens is the person in front of him crashes. The car then catches on fire of this person who ran in front of him, and that person comes out of the car while actually burning to death. And this was the most freaky part of the dream to him, he said. This person coming out of the car while burning to death, again, is a reenactment. It's not an actual video due to the fact we can't record dreams, obviously. But this is his description of how the man looked, as though the fire was not real, as though it was levitating around him and not on him. So that's why it's kind of looking like strange CGI here. He said he didn't know what to do the first couple of times he had this dream, and that he and his family just watched as this guy dies, and he would approach the car, scaring him awake every time, and he would awake in a cold sweat. So he said one time he thought, when I keep having this dream again and again and again, I'd like to try something a little bit different. I'd like to see what would happen if I actually try to step out of the car and go assist this guy and see if there's any way I can help him. Maybe he's some kind of spirit within a dream and I can help him if I actually get out of my car and see what the matter is and see if there is something I can do as far as like a sixth sense with this person. Unfortunately for him, when he got out, the guy was no longer there. He wasn't coming out of the car. He didn't know what to do. He's looking around for the guy, and actually at this point, instead of the guy coming out of the car, he lunges from behind and actually grabs the man. and encases him too in the flame that kills him. So he ends up dying himself in the dream as well. So he said nothing would help. No matter what he tried, the guy would constantly end up putting him in a situation that was uncomfortable, deadly, or even lead to death. So instead of trying anything else, he would just let himself stay inside the car or either try to help but always end up with the same results, unfortunately. Now, where this actually ties into a camera, because I'm sure you're wondering that at this point, if the guy is actually dealing with a camera, what is it talking about? And what happened was, after he stopped having this dream, he thought the whole experience was over until it reached into his real life. One time when he was with his daughters at a park who were also in the same dream, while actually taking a picture of them, through the viewfinder he saw his own daughter's mouth start to move. And while his daughter's mouth was moving, he could hear the words Atsuya, 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 just like the man had said in the dream, which is hot, 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 again and again and again. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and just let that part play here. You can listen to it. And apparently, if you look closely at this girl's jacket, the hood of it, you can see the face of the man who he saw in his dream. And he said that showed up later in the picture as well. So that's how this actually ties into the actual picture aspect of ghost camera. Next is obviously here a mirror, and we're going to be dealing with a mirror demon. Not exactly a ghost, but this is actually supposed to be a demon. What this demon actually does is take the form of the person who is staring into the mirror. By doing that, they can try to take their own presence and start to build a pathway into the actual human world. It's said that the first thing that they'll do is try to capture an experience of a person, place, or thing, and then try to capture that person within that place. After they take over that form, that's the next step to them getting into this world. But unfortunately for them, I guess, is the fact that there's a ritual needed to let them get through the mirror to the other side. So luckily, this is just the first step you're kind of seeing, is them taking the form of this young girl. If you look closely again, the mirror does not reflect correctly, and you actually see her face turning the other way, because this is supposedly the demon taking the form of her and trying to enter the human world. Look again, and you'll see her face doesn't properly turn in the one mirror. This is kind of a famous picture here in Japan, a very famous demon caught on video type aspect. Closer up this time, just so you can see the full thing. Here's her, and you'll see, quite apparently, as she turns, the face in the mirror does not turn the same way. Last but not least, what we deal with is another home video, and again on this video is a ghost caught on camera. It's actually going to be behind this child in a couple different scenes, so you're going to have to look quickly and catch where you'll see this ghost on camera again and again and again. So it's a couple different scenes actually. Take a look, watch closely, always try to look behind the people in these pictures to find the ghosts. And luckily for us, they showed it a couple times, so we have a chance when you see that Moichido sign. If you just saw right there, and one more time, up, right behind him there. Did you guys see it? Let's try one more time, Moichido. That's how we know it's going to be shown again. Little Japanese lesson there. Take a look now behind his shoulder, and then on the other side of his body. First his shoulder at the top. If you take a look right behind here, you'll start to see it. There it is. And then on the other side of his body, the ghost is closer. So apparently this one appears to be moving closer to the camera as the picture is taken. And usually what people say is the best thing to do at this point is to stop filming or taking pictures, due to the fact that it'll stop the progression of, I guess, these camera-motivated ghosts is the best way to put it about. And apparently this is another case of camera obscura, where the ghost is actually being caught due to the fact that it is on camera. Behind the shoulder right there, you can take a look. And one more time, on the other side of him, you'll see the face actually gets closer to the screen in front of us. There you are. You can see the side of her face, hair covering the eye, as is natural with ghosts here in Japan. Another ghost on camera. Now, the next story I'm going to tell you about, it deals with a friend who I knew and worked with. He lived here about 7 years ago here in Japan, and it's about his encounter with a video that he purchased from a homeless person out by Osaka-jo. And what he thought he was purchasing was an old episode of the TV show Alf, but what he found out later was that it was a bootleg, or perhaps a fan-made copy that was completely hideous compared to its normal series. And those of you who don't know Alf, it's an old comedy sitcom about a brown furry alien who lives with a family called the Tanner family. Circa 1980 to 1990, ran for about, I think, 4 seasons, and then suddenly stopped at the very end. There was a to-be-continued show, and no one really ever saw the continuation of this. And supposedly, when he found this Laserdisc that had this final lost episode on it, he witnessed something pretty hideous. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is just tell you the story, and also read excerpts from the actual creepypasta wiki that he wrote about his experience finding this. So, as I said, it began with him just taking a walk out by Osaka-jo, which is a big and famous castle here in Osaka. And when he was out there, he was just exploring the different park areas because there's a lot of park, there's a lot of greenery. It's one of the most rural areas in the middle of the city. And he was just exploring that, and it was about midnight, he said. You can still visit at that time. It's a World Heritage Site, but it's open at all hours. You can't go inside the castle at that time, but you can still explore all the different parks because they're open to the public. He was exploring that, and while he ran into all different types of stuff, such as takoyaki stands, as you would here in Osaka. He ran into different couples sneaking away from their houses due to the fact that they want a little private time away from the thin walls of Japanese apartments. And one of the other things he discovered was a homeless man who had set up a tiny booth in which he was selling cheap used items like a lot of homeless people do here. They tend not to try and collect or beg for money. They like to have more pride in actually earning what they get, and this person was actually selling all different types of weird bootlegs. And what he found was an old bootleg of Alf on a Laserdisc. Now, he himself hadn't ever owned a Laserdisc or a Laserdisc machine, but he thought, what a collector's item, and what, last episode, that's a lost episode. No one's ever seen it. Let's find out what happened with the final continuation. He bought it and didn't really think too much of it afterwards, aside from the fact that the guy who sold it to him was extremely dirty and, less to say, a little bit creepy due to his unkempt appearance. He took it home, he left it at his house for a while, actually kind of forgot about it while he was working here, hanging out with friends, drinking beer, and eating yummy stuff like yakisoba. Till one day a friend came over and realized that he had this last final episode. Now, his friend too was also a fan of the Alf series and wanted to see the last episode because all of us don't really know what happens in the very end. It just kind of finishes and says to be continued. He's captured by some kind of alien hunting organization by the government in the actual series, but no one actually finds out what happens to him after they capture him. So his friend, being an avid fan, said, "Can I borrow the Laserdisc because I actually have a friend who can convert it to DVD." And so his friend thought, well, I too would like to see what I actually purchased, so go ahead, take it, let's see what happens. So they brought it over to their friend's house, and he was a Japanese guy who was a super hardcore otaku techie who could get into all different types of old school analog video, even make things like Betamax turn into VHS to DVD to CD to anything you'd want. And what he did with this is convert it to a .avi file and put it on a DVD. Pretty much, it didn't take too much time due to the fact that the episode was only about an hour long, and he also could just pretty much use a machine that would go ahead and format over the spots on the disc that had been corroded with time, such as scratches and stuff like you would find on a DVD. He put it in there and told my friend, you guys can go hang out at a bar, eat some food, drink some beer, and I'll get back to you when the final copy finally finishes. It should just only take a couple hours, and I'll just bring it over to the bar here. So they nodded their head, gave him the thumbs up, left and hung out for just a short time at an izakaya nearby, drinking some beer, eating all different great things that go with beer here in Japan, like cartilage and liver and yakisoba, like I said, and karage, wonderful salty foods like that that taste delicious with beer. And they're a little bit buzzed now, they're feeling it, and they're enjoying themselves. And finally, the guy showed back up, and he was all gaunt and pale in the face. Now, this guy, he had been pale and gaunt before due to the fact that his otaku IT status had kind of left him a hikikomori shut-in who never actually got to see the light of day. But this time he was looking even more pale and gaunt than usual, and it kind of freaked them out a little bit, but they thought, you know what, let's not worry him too much. It's really impolite in Japan to call any kind of notation to someone's appearance, so they didn't say anything. They just waited for him to go ahead and give him the disc. He gave it to them, and they said, hey, come on, join us for a beer. You know, you did this for us. The least we can do is give you some money or buy a couple of beers. He refused, actually, and in a pathetic, almost whimpering way, scurried back out of the izakaya, and they thought, wow, that's really strange. I'm not really sure why he would do that, but okay. Anyway, a couple beers later, they finally decided, you know what, it's time to go home and check this thing out finally. What did this guy find here on the video? They get home later, probably about a half hour. They sit down, and this is what the video had. I'm going to read it verbatim from the wiki that my friend wrote. And this is an actual true story of some kind of weird bootleg that he found. It starts here talking about the title coming on the screen as he turned it on. The title came onto the screen in the word Alf in big white letters of that familiar font, and its katakana and Japanese subtitles showed up. It appeared on screen with Alf, who then let out a horrendous, blood-curdling scream. Out of breath and panting, screaming until his voice was hoarse, until he could scream no more. But in between sobs and desperate gasps for breath, he screamed and screamed even more. He stared into the camera, with teared-up, dying, pleading eyes staring at us. As he screamed and screamed, it must have gone on forever. It seemed like maybe hours, but possibly was only a few minutes. At least, and just when we thought we couldn't take any more, just when the constant screaming was eating away at our very souls, the terrible saxophone music for the intro started. We couldn't believe it. Along with the continued screams, that saxophone-led theme song from the 3rd and 4th seasons of Alf began to play monotonously. It was that same music, but somehow raw, as if pushed through overloaded speakers and recorded onto a wax cylinder, then blasted out again at ear-splitting volume. In between intercepted cuts of jolly scenes from the past, shots of the Tanner family, credits starring Max Wright, Ann Sheeding, and random rips of analog and digital distortion, increasing in severity all the time, were images of terrible torture. Alf was being autopsied. A close-up of a hand being drilled, a leg being hobbled with a sledgehammer, and all the while that hideous screaming and panting, screaming and crying. The quality of the footage was deteriorating still, and as the happy memories shot over, they began to be blurred and overlaid with torture and miserable wails, distorted by the saxophone music and white noise. It all began to coalesce, and I began to feel sick. All those terrible experiences built up into a roar, while suddenly the video jumped and stuck on a loop. A split second of smiling Willie Tanner, starring Max Wright, emblazoned across a full-body shot of Alf, strapped to an autopsy table, with his torso peeled open, revealing the beating, bleeding insides of his alien anatomy. These two hideous images, jumping, cutting, looping between each other at irregular intervals. All the while, the screaming, the white noise, the distortion, the lumpen saxophone stuck. And I swear, under all the clamor, I could hear the maniacal laughter of Alf himself. So what my friend is describing here is that when he actually turned on the video and watched this final episode, it continued on with the story of Alf being captured by the alien investigation team, but it moved on to a very dark and sinister plot of him then being autopsied. Let me continue to read a little bit more. These two images looped for so long that I began to think it was the actual AVI that was skipping, but I checked and saw the VLC time slider moving along naturally. The looping continued until a more serious distortion obliterated all sound and visuals, replacing them with pixelated blocks and indistinguishable noise. Then the picture returned to its lower quality still, and the scene had changed. The camera now looked like camcorder quality. It seemed to be slightly lying over on its side on a tabletop, looking across the room to the autopsy table where Alf lay strapped down. Lighting was dim, and a green tinge to the picture suggested night vision video. The scene was obscured by someone stepping in front of the camera, a person in a doctor's scrubs, gloves and an apron, all heavily stained with blood and feces. They adjusted the camera slightly and stepped out of the shot. Alf may have been lying unconscious, and then seemed to come to and began mumbling and whimpering, begging, "No, no, no, please, no," his head moving side to side slightly. He appeared delirious, distressed, and barely alive. The doctor walked back into the shot and stood with his back to the camera beside Alf and the autopsy table. His features were covered with a gray surgeon's hat and a face mask. He stood over Alf, looking down at him, and appeared to be talking. We couldn't hear a word he said, just the occasional calm, constant penetrating through the Alf's sobbing and pleading, and the slight movements of the head and shoulders. The scene remained unchanged except for the persistent random interference of distortion, or maybe 5 minutes of inaudible calm speech. Unchanged except for the occasional sudden jump cuts to the smiling faces of Kate, Lynn, and Brian Tanner, who seemed to be looking on in curious glee. It was as though the surgeon, the torturer, was explaining matter-of-factly exactly what he was going to be doing to Alf. The sobbing and pleading continued throughout, then a brief flash of distortion and white noise, leading to sudden blackness. Finally, for the ending, he writes, "Alf screamed and screamed a guttural anguish, and the credit sequence rolled. As the camera held on this scene for a moment and the words created by Paul Fusco faded on the screen, Alf's eyes blinked open and he looked directly into the camera. The voice of the cameraman sounded, the voice of the surgeon sounded, and the voice of Willie Tanner sounded, saying, 'Good morning, Alf.'" And it ends there for his description of the video. My friend was kind of really perturbed by this, I think even mortified more so, and found himself feeling sick almost, nauseated and extreme headaches after watching this. Mind you, of course, he got rid of the video because of its horrible nature, and he said it was one of the worst experiences while he was in Japan. He eventually did return to his hometown in England, and he said he still has emailed people and tried to research this a little bit more, but has found no accounts as to where this could have come from or what the origin of it is. True or not, who knows? Up to you to decide. Well guys, that's it for tonight. I implore you to go out and research all these stories that you see on here. I myself don't put a lot of connections to them due to the fact that I might run into copyright issues and things like that, but I totally implore you to go out and explore them yourself. Also, explore your own new and scary stories that are out there everywhere on the internet from Japan. And if you find one that you think is extremely interesting, as always, feel free to message me, PM me, send me a line on Facebook or any of my other sites, and let me know if there's something you think I too should share on Osoroshii Saturday. Until next time, I'm Unrested, and this is Osoroshii Saturday.